Alien girl shows human in ancient temple. When he touches it, a door opens. Dorian Kale gazed out the window of the ship as it rocked violently, the flames from the jet engines flaring up fiercely as space pirates tried to destroy it. The ship Vega's Fury, which he had called home for many long years of travel, now seemed like a dying wild beast. His hand gripped the helm tightly, trying to maintain balance amidst the powerful sways. I can't let them win, he thought, desperation rising in waves within him. The situation grew even more dire when a heavy impact damaged the engines. The ship began losing control. Dorian barely had time to see the faint glow of the cosmic night before a sudden blue light pierced through space, stretching out from a strange planet. Something pulled him down, an inexplicable gravitational force, and before he could realize what had happened, the ship had made an unwanted landing on this planet. The surroundings were completely different: dry, cracked earth, and no sign of life. Dorian exited the ship, looking up at the starry sky above. What kind of planet was this, and why had he been drawn here? As he tried to assess the situation, a figure appeared in the distance. Lyra, an alien creature with silver-like skin eyes, glowing like stars in the night, and a delicate, graceful appearance. She stood there without any sign of fear, merely gazing at Dorian with a cold yet curious look. Lyra was a guardian of the ancient temple, where secrets were hidden that could either save or destroy the planet Eldora. When she extended her hand inviting him, Dorian realized that her appearance was no coincidence. She knew something about him, or at least about this planet, that he did not yet understand. The story began with the encounter of two beings or creatures from different worlds, one on the run, the other a protector, and the secrets of Eldora were about to begin to unfold. But before they could understand each other's purpose, Dorian and Lyra would have to face a much greater challenge: the ancient temple and the external forces that were beginning to awaken. Dorian felt the tension. Could he trust Lyra? And what had brought him to this planet, the final destination of his journey? As Dorian and Lyra entered the ancient temple, the air around them seemed to grow heavy. The walls were covered in green moss. The massive stone pillars adorned with strange carvings, and a dim light emitted from the gaps between the ancient stones. Dorian's footsteps echoed through the quiet space, but he sensed something was wrong. The planet Eldora seemed to hold a great secret that he couldn't yet understand. Lyra stood beside him, her bright eyes as if reading everything in his mind. This temple, it's not just an ancient structure, it's a gateway, she said, her voice deep and warm, but also filled with worry. This gateway could connect us to a power left behind by the ancient civilization. Dorian looked at Lyra with suspicion. A gateway? But what could this gateway do for us? And why is it here on a dead planet like this? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and touched the strange carvings on the stone wall. The symbols etched on it seemed not just decorative, but contained a message from the past. Because this temple holds an energy source created by the ancient civilization, and it has the power to change not only the fate of Eldora, but of the entire universe. Lyra said, her voice now more urgent. If we don't do this right, everything will end. Dorian felt the tension in the air rise. He could sense a hidden power within the temple. But could he trust Lyra's words from a being he had met barely a day ago? The questions in his mind kept spinning. Are you sure this energy source will save the planet? Dorian asked, his eyes gleaming with doubt. And if it can be destroyed, then what, are we opening the door to destruction? Lyra didn't answer immediately, quietly observing a large stone table in the middle of the room. I can't tell you for sure, but what I do know is that we have a chance. A single chance to control this energy if we can perform the ritual correctly. Dorian couldn't help but feel the anxiety within him. He was so close to something that could change the entire universe, and yet he wasn't sure if he was capable of controlling that power. Just as they were discussing, a faint noise echoed from behind. Dorian turned around, but saw only the dim darkness, yet the feeling of unease crept inside him. They were not alone. As Lyra and Dorian continued exploring the temple, they realized that beyond the ancient symbols there were signs of an extraterrestrial presence. Alien creatures they hadn't expected began to appear from the shadows, as if they had known about the temple's existence all along. Where did they come from? And what did they want? Dorian and Lyra had already begun to sink deep into a dangerous game that they didn't fully understand, and the big questions still remained unanswered. Could they protect the temple, or would its existence bring about destruction for all? On the third day of their journey to explore the temple, Dorian and Lyra had become inseparable companions. Each step they took brought them closer to the secrets hidden within the temple. Dorian, once accustomed to the hardships of life on colonial planets, was beginning to sense something new, a strange, inexplicable feeling he had never experienced before: trust. Trust in Lyra, trust in himself, and trust in the mysterious wonders of the temple. Lyra seemed to understand the hesitation in Dorian's heart. She wasn't in a rush, not forcing him, but gently guiding him as if she knew exactly what was going to happen. During their rest breaks, she would tell him about her past, her loneliness, the protection she had always given to the temple, and the guardians who had sacrificed their lives before her. She never said it outright, but Dorian could feel the weariness in her eyes. Have you ever felt that everything you've lived fought for is just a part of a bigger story? Lyra asked softly one starlit night as they sat on a large rock outside the temple. Dorian looked at Lyra, unsure how to respond. Maybe, definitely, he sighed. But I don't think I'm part of any bigger story. I'm just a survivor, nothing more. Lyra gazed at him with a profound look, her bright eyes sparkling in the dark. You're not that simple, Dorian. Everyone has a role in the story, whether they realize it or not. Her words made Dorian pause. Throughout his life, he had never thought of himself as someone special. But now what he was going through along with Lyra made him feel like he had a greater purpose. And most of all, he felt as if he was truly connecting with her. Throughout the journey, Dorian began to realize that his relationship with Lyra wasn't just a chance encounter. They were like lost pieces of a puzzle, and now their presence in this ancient temple was the pivotal moment in their fates. Both shared a powerful connection, a bloodline link to an ancient forgotten civilization. Dorian didn't fully understand everything he was feeling, but one thing he knew for sure. Lyra wasn't just a guardian of the temple. She was a crucial part of the story he had unintentionally wandered into. One night, as the moonlight shone through the stone pillars, Lyra revealed a secret to Dorian. I'm not the only one who carries the memories of the ancient civilization. You, Dorian, you have a part in it too. I felt it the moment I first met you. You have hidden memories within you, a legacy you haven't yet recognized. Dorian stared at her, his eyes wide in astonishment. Memories, how could that be? Lyra smiled gently. Because you are a descendant of those who built this temple. And the power that the temple holds doesn't just lie within the stone columns, but within you and me. We are the last of a great civilization, and now we must protect what remains. This revelation seemed to change everything. Dorian began to feel a strange energy within himself. It wasn't physical strength, but a sensation of connection. The bond between him and the temple had never been clearer. But this also came with a heavy burden. Could he and Lyra bear this power? Could they stop the extraterrestrial forces that were targeting the temple and its energy? So does this mean we are the only ones who can save this planet? Dorian asked, his voice growing more serious. Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Not just save the planet, we can change the fate of the entire universe if we do it right. But we must perform the final ritual. Fear, uncertainty about the future, and the feeling of carrying a massive responsibility made Dorian hesitate, but he knew he couldn't turn back. The journey had gone too far, and it was no longer just about protecting Eldora. It was about discovering himself, and that made Dorian ready to face whatever challenges the future held. Lyra and Dorian were ready, not just to protect the temple, but to fulfill a mission from which there was no retreat. The tension within the temple reached its peak as Dorian and Lyra prepared to move into the next phase of their exploration. Despite discovering the deep connection between them and the ancient civilization, everything was not as simple as they had thought. The extraterrestrial forces were still silently watching, and now they had begun to make their move. One day, as Dorian and Lyra were on another scouting mission, they noticed a change in the behavior of one of Lyra's companions, Jarek. He was an alien warrior whom Lyra had trusted for a long time, always accompanying her on missions to protect the temple. However, this time Dorian sensed a shift in Jarek's gaze. It no longer held loyalty, but rather a look full of scheming. Dorian couldn't understand why Jarek had changed, but he couldn't deny that something was wrong. One night as they were resting, Dorian decided to speak directly to Jarek. He was standing outside the temple, his eyes deep in thought. Jarek Dorian spoke, walking up to him. "Is there something going on between you and Lyra?" Jarek turned to look at Dorian, his expression cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, his voice unfriendly. Dorian didn't back down. He had a bad feeling. "Lyra trusted you, but now I feel something is off." "Can you explain?" Jarek was silent for a long moment, then finally he sneered. "Lyra doesn't know, but I know all too well. This temple doesn't just contain the power to save the planet, it's the key to controlling everything. And I'm not going to let anyone, not even her, stand in my way." Dorian was stunned. You're betraying her." Jarek looked at Dorian, his eyes sharp as knives. "Betraying? I'm just doing what needs to be done. You and she don't understand, Dorian. This temple is not for people like us. It's a powerful weapon, and if we don't take control of it, someone else will. I won't let that happen." Dorian felt a shock run through him as he heard these words. He didn't want to believe it, but the truth was painfully clear. Jarek, who they had considered an ally, had betrayed Lyra, and now he wouldn't stop until he claimed the power of the temple for himself. Meanwhile, Lyra, still inside the temple with the dim light filtering through the stone pillars, was unaware of the betrayal unfolding. Dorian knew he had to warn her immediately, but he also had to figure out how to stop Jarek before he could carry out his plans. As Dorian turned to go back and inform Lyra, a pang of pain filled his heart. Lyra had trusted Jarek so much, but now everything has changed. Both Dorian and Lyra faced a difficult decision. Not only did they have to protect the temple, but they also had to fight against those they had once trusted. This betrayal could break everything they had built, but Dorian and Lyra had no choice but to confront Jarek and stop him before it was too late. But would they be able to do that when the betrayal had reached the deepest parts of those Lyra had trusted most? The answer could only be found in the battles to come. The danger was clearer than ever, and Dorian no longer had time to dwell on Jarek's betrayal. The ancient temple was not only a place of hidden secrets of a lost civilization, but now it had become the focal point of a war, not just between Dorian, Lyra, and Jarek, but between the entire universe and the impending destruction. They had no choice but to perform the ritual to connect with the energy source of the temple, a ritual that Lyra believed would save the planet Eldora and stop the external forces. "We cannot delay," Lyra said, as Dorian stood with her in front of the ancient stone table where the ritual would take place. "This ritual cannot miss any elements, and every step must be precise." Dorian looked at the carvings on the surface of the stone table. The markings of the ancient civilization were not just drawings. They were instructions, spells locked away for thousands of years. To perform this ritual, they needed to combine their power with the energy in the temple. But how could they activate everything that had been hidden within it? Lyra began explaining. "When we perform this ritual, we must connect with the energy flow of the temple. We need perfect synchronization between our power and the memories that remain within us. If either of us makes a mistake, not only will Eldor be lost, but we will be destroyed as well." Dorian understood that he was in a life or death situation. But at that moment, one question continued to echo in his mind. Could they perform the ritual without being manipulated by this energy? He had seen too many examples of people blinded by cosmic power, and he feared he might become part of that story. "Lyra, can we perform the ritual without letting this power control us?" Dorian asked, his gaze serious. Lyra looked into Dorian's eyes with sincerity, but also with determination. "We can't do this alone, Dorian. It requires perfect cooperation. If the two of us don't truly connect and trust each other, we won't be able to control this energy." But in that moment, Dorian felt a hesitation within himself. Had their bond formed in just a few short days been strong enough to withstand such a monumental responsibility? Lyra trusted him, but Dorian wasn't sure he could live through this without the power changing him completely. The tension rose as Dorian and Lyra began to prepare the necessary tools for the ritual. Ancient stones artifacts from the lost civilization were placed around the stone table, forming a protective circle and linking the energy flows. Everything had to be arranged precisely just as Lyra had learned in the lessons from the past. "We can't afford any mistakes," Lyra muttered, her hand gently brushing the ancient stones. "All life on Eldora depends on us." Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from afar, pulling Dorian and Lyra out of their thoughts. They turned to see a dark figure appear. It was Jarek. Dorian knew Jarek was not the type to give up easily, and right now he wasn't here for peaceful conversation. Jarek stood there, his eyes red with anger and ambition. "You don't understand, Lyra," he said coldly. "This temple is not something to protect. It's something to control. Don't make me destroy it and destroy both of you." Lyra stood firm, her hand gripping her protective sword, her eyes never leaving Jarek. "This temple will not fall into the wrong hands," she replied, her voice resolute. "We will do what is right, and if necessary, I will stop you." Dorian felt the tension surge. Both Lyra and Jarek now stood before him, each with a part in the temple's energy. Both believed they were the only ones capable of controlling it. But would there be enough strength within them to stop the devastation Jarek was trying to bring? This battle was not only happening in space, but also in the hearts of these individuals. Would love, loyalty, and sacrifice triumph over ambition and betrayal? Or would betrayal steal? The ancient temple stood in silence as though it were waiting for a great event. The stone walls remained still, yet within that space, every breath of Dorian and Lyra became heavy. Each step they took echoed through the air, as though time itself was stretching every second. At this moment, they were no longer just two individuals, but part of a grand chain of events, a ritual that had been destined for thousands of years. Dorian felt he was about to face something vast beyond his control. Every moment seemed to carry the power to change everything. He looked at Lyra, the one he had learned to trust, and in her eyes he saw determination, sacrifice, and fear. Yet nothing could make them turn back. "Dorian," Lyra said, her voice echoing in the silent space of the temple. "We're ready. Remember, this ritual is not just about the temple. It's about us, the connection between us, and everything we represent. We have to trust in ourselves." Dorian nodded, but doubt still lingered in his heart. Were they strong enough to resist what Jarek was trying to do? And could they perform the ritual without being controlled by the energy of the temple? Without becoming mere instruments of a power they still didn't fully understand. The two of them approached the ancient stone table, where the ancient carvings had been etched long ago. These markings seemed alive, glowing faintly, as though whispering words from a time long past. Lyra raised her hand and gently placed it upon the carvings. Dorian followed her, a cold shiver running down his spine as he felt a power emanating from the ancient markings. "We must synchronize," Lyra said, her gaze locking with Dorian's. "Our bodies, our souls must connect. Only then can this energy lead us to a favorable outcome." Dorian took a deep breath, feeling the tension in the air. He placed his hand on the stone table, trying to merge with Lyra's energy, but the strange sensation refused to leave him. Everything around them seemed to change. The stone walls around them almost seemed to come alive, the light from the carvings growing stronger, as though calling out to unseen forces. "We can do this," Lyra whispered more to herself than to Dorian. As they both began the ritual, a powerful surge of energy erupted from the stone table, engulfing their bodies. It felt as if Dorian and Lyra were being torn from themselves, pulled into another dimension. The distant memories of the ancient civilization began to emerge in their minds, faint images of those who had once lived on this planet of prosperity and then the catastrophic downfall. Suddenly, Dorian felt a sharp pain in his head. The memories of the ancient civilization, the very ones Lyra had mentioned, now exploded in his mind. Strange emotions, images of great technologies, and the terrifying collapse of it all flooded his consciousness. He couldn't control these memories, couldn't escape them. Lyra, sensing Dorian's loss of control, turned to him with a worried look. "Dorian, hold on. Don't let it take you." Dorian felt an overwhelming force, a strange power slowly claiming his body. It was like a tsunami attacking him from all sides. But something inside him refused to succumb. He was used to fighting for survival, and now he would fight to retain his own freedom. "Lyra," he shouted, "we can't let it control us. We must maintain control." Lyra looked at Dorian with eyes full of empathy, reaching out toward him. "Together, Dorian, we're the only ones who can master this power. Together, we won't let it take us." With one final effort, the two of them focused their strength, resisting the temple's claim. And just when Dorian thought he couldn't bear it anymore, a brilliant flash of light erupted from them, the connection between their bodies growing stronger, as though they were becoming one single entity. The pain gradually subsided, and as the darkness in his mind began to fade, Dorian felt an overwhelming strength coursing through his body. The temple had started to activate again, and with it the planet Eldora was beginning to change. But whether this change would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. Dorian had little time to think. They had mastered the energy, but Jarek was still somewhere in the temple waiting to carry out his plan. At that moment, Dorian knew that the true battle had only just begun. As the ritual ended, both Dorian and Lyra felt an immediate change. A massive surge of energy seemed to flood their bodies, each cell coming alive, as if they were directly connected to the ancient temple. It wasn't just energy, but also memories, images of a civilization that had vanished thousands of years ago, visions of great empires, wars, and ultimately an inevitable collapse. These images didn't just remain in their minds, but felt like a part of their bodies flowing through their blood. Dorian realized that it wasn't the temple, but he and Lyra who were the key to freeing Eldora from disaster. But this also meant that they were carrying the burden of memories and power that they couldn't yet fully control. Lyra looked at Dorian, her eyes filled with complex emotions. "We've done it, but we can't hold this within us forever. This energy isn't just a gift, it's a responsibility." Dorian nodded, but the worry remained. "I understand, but can we control it? Could there be changes in us we can't foresee?" His words echoed through the silent space of the temple, but the answer was still unclear. Dorian looked at the stone table where they had placed their hands to connect with the temple. The strange sensation still lingered within him, a miraculous harmony between them and the temple, but also a looming danger. He didn't know if the energy would continue to explode or subside. Suddenly, a noise shattered the stillness. Dorian and Lyra turned immediately, only to see Jarek stepping out from the shadows. He stood there, a smug look on his face, holding something in his hand. A strange ring, perhaps the tool to activate the temple's power. "What is that?" Dorian asked, his heart sinking. Everything was becoming clearer now. Jarek had been plotting something for a long time, and now he was preparing to use the temple's energy for his own purposes. Jarek smiled, his eyes cold and full of ambition. "You don't understand, Dorian. This temple isn't something to protect. It's a weapon, a tool that can change everything." Lyra stood tall, her gaze no longer soft, but filled with resolve. "You can't control it, Jarek. This temple isn't meant for personal use. If you don't stop now, you'll destroy everything." Jarek laughed loudly, his mockery making the atmosphere even heavier. "Let me show you the price of not understanding this power." He raised the ring and a brilliant flash of light erupted from it. In an instant, a powerful wave of energy shot out from the ring, slamming into Dorian and Lyra. Both were thrown back, feeling as though they were facing a massive energy storm. Dorian and Lyra struggled to maintain their balance, but they could feel that this power was far beyond what they had just tapped into from the temple. "What do we do?" Dorian shouted through the raging wind of energy. Lyra didn't respond immediately. She was observing, searching for a way to deal with the situation. "We have to cut the energy source off, but to do that, we need to separate the ring from Jarek. If not, he will take full control." Dorian nodded, determination rising within him. He knew he couldn't let Jarek destroy the temple and the planet Eldora. He looked at Lyra, and they began to act. Lyra drew her sword, preparing to advance toward Jarek, while Dorian cautiously circled around, looking for a way to approach from behind. But Jarek was no easy opponent. He immediately sensed their intention, and a bright light from the ring flared up, forming a protective shield around him. "You won't stop me?" Dorian Jarek screamed, his voice reverberating throughout the temple. "I won't stop until everything is under my control." Lyra hesitated no longer. She lunged toward Jarek with surprising speed, her sword gleaming in her hand. "If you don't stop now, you'll have no chance left." Dorian knew that the battle now wasn't just taking place within the temple, but was a fight for power, survival, and sacrifice. He couldn't let Jarek, a traitor, take control of this universe, and he wouldn't allow the energy of the temple to be misused. The battle erupted within the ancient temple, with energy beams and fierce combat between the three of them. Who would emerge victorious, and would Eldora be saved or witness its destruction at the hands of those meant to protect it, all everything away? The battle within the temple grew fiercer by the moment. Blinding flashes of light from Jarek's ring sent powerful waves of energy crashing into the ancient stone walls, causing them to crumble. Dorian and Lyra had to move constantly, dodging the sharp blasts from the ring as they tried to get closer to Jarek. Both were aware that this was no simple fight. It was a life-or-death struggle, not only for themselves, but for the survival of the planet Eldora and the entire universe. Lyra, with the expertise of a warrior protector of the temple, relentlessly attacked Jarek, each strike from her sword glowing as though it had absorbed all the temple's energy. However, Jarek's ring created a nearly impenetrable barrier. Dorian could do nothing but follow Lyra, trying to support her while simultaneously avoiding the ring's attacks. "We have to defeat him not just physically, but we need to disconnect him from the temple," Dorian shouted, but in his heart he still hadn't figured out how to achieve that. Lyra turned to look at Dorian, her face stern. "You're right. This temple can't continue to be manipulated by him. We need to destroy the ring and end this." Dorian closed his eyes, trying to focus, feeling the flow of energy moving through his body. He could feel the connection between himself and Lyra growing stronger, as if a part of the temple's power was flowing through them. They were one, and if they couldn't complete the ritual and sever Jarek's link with the temple, not only Eldora but the entire universe would be irrevocably changed. Jarek continued to laugh loudly, the fanaticism in his eyes sending a chill down Dorian's spine. "Do you think you can stop me? I understand this temple better than anyone. I won't let you destroy my plans." Dorian decided to act. "Lyra, I'll distract him. You focus on the ring." Lyra nodded with determination. Dorian rushed to the opposite side, making Jarek turn his attention to him. A burst of energy shot from the ring, but Dorian quickly dodged, darting into the shadows of the temple. His eyes never left Jarek, calculating each move, everything unfolding quickly, like a fight for survival. Meanwhile, Lyra moved toward Jarek from behind. She ran like the wind, her sword drawn, its cold gleam reflecting off the metal. She knew time was running out. She couldn't allow Jarek to continue controlling the ring and change everything. Both of them were so close to the threshold of survival. "Jarek!" Lyra shouted as she lunged. "End this game!" Sensing the threat behind him, Jarek turned but wasn't prepared for Lyra's strike. She lunged her sword, aiming for the ring, but just as she neared it, a powerful shockwave sent her flying off course. "No!" Lyra cried out, feeling the increasing strength of the ring's protection over Jarek. Dorian couldn't let this situation continue. He rushed toward Lyra, his eyes flashing with resolve. "We must combine our strength. This is our only chance." The two locked eyes, and with complete unity in thought, they channeled all their power into one decisive strike. Dorian felt an unprecedented surge of energy coursing through his body, and as Lyra poured her strength into her sword, a brilliant beam of light erupted from the temple, stronger than ever before. The three of them were swept up in a torrent of energy. Lyra and Dorian advanced toward the ring, and just as Jarek prepared to retaliate, they combined their strength, wrenching the ring from his hand. But instead of destroying it, they used the temple's energy to sever the ring's connection to both Jarek and the temple. A shock wave of energy shattered around them, and then suddenly the atmosphere became still. Jarek collapsed, his eyes hollow as the ring fell from his hand. You've won," he whispered, his face filled with despair. At that moment, the power of the temple was under control, and Eldora no longer faced devastation. Lyra and Dorian stood breathing heavily, gazing at the dimly glowing ring before them. At last they had regained control of the temple. But in that moment, Dorian looked at Lyra, sensing that they had just fought a battle, not only for power, but for the connection between two people. "We did it," Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with trust. Dorian smiled, feeling both exhausted and content. "Not just saved Eldora, we saved ourselves too." As everything calmed down, Dorian and Lyra stood there looking at the ancient temple, knowing that a new chapter had begun. The old forces had been defeated, but the big question still lingered: what would they do next? As the sighs of relief from Dorian and Lyra merged in the stillness of the temple, everything seemed to return to peace. However, this peace was only temporary, a fleeting light in a world full of chaos. Dorian could still feel the vibrations from the immense energy, even though the ring had been stripped from Jarek's hand. The temple's secrets had not been fully revealed, and their journey was far from over. Lyra gazed at the ancient stone columns, as if pondering her past, the future of Eldora, and what would come next. "We've won, but I feel there's something still left behind," she said, her voice deep in thought. her gaze fixed on the massive stones that reflected the dim ethereal light. Dorian stood next to Lyra, looking at the vastness of the temple, feeling the change gradually unfolding around them. "What's that feeling? How can we be sure the temple is truly no longer dangerous?" he asked, his heart unable to shake the unease. Lyra turned to him, offering a small knowing smile. "This temple isn't just a storehouse of energy, it's a part of Eldora, an inseparable part. And by reconnecting with it, we've altered the future of this planet. But the change didn't just come from the energy, Dorian. It came from us." Dorian didn't respond immediately. He only nodded. Lyra's words stirred something deep within him. They hadn't just changed a planet on the brink of destruction. They had changed themselves. The bond they shared both with each other and with the temple wasn't just the result of a ritual, but part of a grand plan they still couldn't fully comprehend. Lyra walked toward the center of the temple, where the walls were carved with ancient designs that now seemed to glow softly. She raised her hand, and the light from the carvings appeared to respond, shining in a magical way. "What we've done isn't just the end of a battle," Lyra said softly, as though speaking to herself. "It's the beginning of a new era. Eldora will be reborn, and we are the heirs of the ancient civilization." Dorian moved closer to her, feeling the depth of her words. He looked at the carvings on the walls, and now he could clearly see what she meant. This temple wasn't just a treasure of power, but a witness to a history long forgotten. But now history wasn't just a story of collapse, it was a story of hope. A hope that Dorian and Lyra could bring to this planet, along with the remaining people of Eldora who were waiting for salvation. "Lyra," Dorian spoke, his voice warm but filled with resolve. "So what do we do next? Eldora needs leadership, and we, whether we like it or not, now must carry that responsibility." Lyra turned to look at him, her eyes shining with both determination and contemplation. "We will rebuild Eldora together, not just a new planet, but a new civilization, one where sacrifice, understanding, and loyalty will be the foundation. We may not be able to change the past, but we can shape the future." Dorian smiled. "So, where do we start?" Lyra turned back to look at the temple, where the light was beginning to spread throughout the space. "From what we've learned, we will open a new era, not just for Eldora, but for all civilizations in this universe. An era where there is no domination, only cooperation and connection." Dorian looked into Lyra's eyes, and in them he saw trust, resilience, and a powerful desire. Though everything was not entirely clear yet, they both knew that this journey was not just their own. It was for the entire universe. They stood there feeling the temple's power radiate out, and a new sense of purpose filled their hearts. A new era, not just for Eldora, but for all the civilizations that remained in the universe, was waiting. In the darkness, the ancient temple seemed to awaken. And with every step Dorian and Lyra took, the planet would begin to heal. But more importantly, they had realized that in their hands not only lay boundless power, but also a great responsibility to change the fate of not just Eldora, but of the entire universe. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds of Eldora, Dorian stood on a high rock outcrop, gazing out at the planet that was gradually being reborn. Trees had begun to sprout on the barren ground, and the vibrant green of new life spread across the land. The sight felt like a dream, but he knew it was real. In this scene, the revival of Eldora was the result of what he and Lyra had accomplished. Yet that sense of peace was fleeting. Dorian knew that a planet like Eldora, with the hidden power in the ancient temple, could not easily remain in peace. And he also knew that this change would not only affect this planet, but would ripple through the vast universe. "Lyra!" Dorian spoke, his gaze still fixed on the scene around them. "We've done what few could have imagined, but I can't shake the feeling that this could attract attention. The forces out there won't easily let this go." Lyra stood beside him, also looking out at the brightening landscape of Eldora, but her eyes betrayed a sense of worry. "You're right. The power of the temple, it may bring healing to this planet, but it's also a target for the greedy. Those who wish to seize this power won't stop pursuing it." Dorian turned to look at Lyra, his eyes reflecting the tension he felt. "We need to prepare, not just to protect the temple, but to protect everything we've built from the start. I can't let Eldora become a target for those seeking power." "Thuri." Lyra furrowed her brow, her determination stronger than ever. "Exactly. They will never give up their pursuit. But we can protect Eldora, not just for this planet, but for the future of the entire universe. Dorian felt the certainty in every word Lyra spoke. No matter how the outside world might change, no matter the dangers waiting for them, he knew they could not stop now. Not now. But the peace didn't last long, and a communication alert soon made the atmosphere even heavier. Lyra quickly checked the information, her face changing as she read the data. A large spacecraft has just appeared in Eldora's orbit. Not just one, but an entire fleet. Lyra said, her voice laced with concern. It's the Red Council. Dorian was silent for a moment, processing the information. The Red Council, a powerful faction known for its boundless ambition and desire to harness the strength of forgotten civilizations. They relentlessly hunted ancient relics and unpredictable sources of power. And if they had discovered Eldora, it was no surprise that they would come seeking to seize the temple. We cannot let them take the temple, Dorian said, his voice firm. If they control this energy, not just Eldora, but the entire universe will fall into the hands of those who would abuse it. Lyra turned to face him, her gaze sharp and resolute. We won't let that happen, but we need to prepare right now. Dorian nodded without hesitation. It's time to summon all our old allies. This will be the greatest battle we've ever faced. Lyra swiftly began reaching out to their old friends, those who had helped them in their previous adventures. The free warriors, the protectors of planets, all of them were ready when called. Now they would rise again, not only to defend the temple, but to protect the future of this planet. As they prepared for the coming storm, both Dorian and Lyra knew that their journey had just entered its most dangerous phase. The fight for Eldora's future had only just begun. Though Eldora had begun to recover, with trees sprouting and cracked land beginning to heal, an unavoidable sense of anxiety hung over Dorian. The planet had been saved, but he knew that peace was temporary. A world with such immense energy would not remain unnoticed by the greedy. Dorian stood outside the temple, his eyes fixed on Eldora's bright sky. Lyra, he spoke, his voice heavy. We've succeeded, but I can't shake the feeling. I can't trust this peace. Everything has changed too quickly. Lyra stood beside him, her hand gripping her sword, her gaze as sharp as the reflected light from the ancient stones. You're right, Dorian. Eldora may be saved, but this energy, the power of the temple, will draw many to it. Ambitious ones, power-hungry forces, they will never let it go. Dorian nodded, looking at Lyra. He knew that not only the temple, but the entire planet was now within the sights of other forces. But what worried him more than anything was their speed and relentless determination. As they spoke, Lyra's communication screen blinked with an alert from a satellite station. Her eyes scanned the information quickly, and her face immediately grew grim. A large spacecraft, a fleet, has entered orbit, Lyra said, her voice taut with tension. They've arrived. It's the Red Council. Dorian squinted, immediately recognizing the danger. The Red Council was no ordinary enemy. They were a powerful military organization, willing to do anything to seize ancient energy sources. If they had discovered Eldora, they wouldn't just come to seize the temple, they would come to dominate the planet. We can't let them take the temple. Dorian said, his voice suddenly hard. If they control the power of this planet, everything we've fought for will be meaningless. Lyra stood tall, her gaze never leaving the screen. You're right. If we don't act now, not only will Eldora fall, but the entire universe will be under their control. They'll destroy everything to get that power. Dorian turned back to Lyra, and he could feel her determination. She wasn't just protecting the temple, she was protecting everything they had fought for, everything they were trying to rebuild. And so was he. We can't do this alone, Dorian said. Our alliance needs to be summoned now. Lyra nodded immediately without hesitation. She turned toward their allies, those warriors and free people from all over who had fought alongside them before. Each group, each individual they had helped, would rise with them once again to protect Eldora. Lyra quickly made contact with the group. Gather now, the Red Council is on its way, and we won't give them a chance to strike. Dorian looked out at Eldora's brightening sky, the clean, fresh atmosphere. But in his heart, he couldn't shake the heavy feeling. A great battle was coming, and this time they wouldn't be standing alone. Dorian and Lyra stood before the stone walls of the temple, the air around them thick with tension. They had prepared everything needed to face the Red Council, But both knew this battle would be their greatest confrontation yet, not just for the survival of the temple, but for the future of the entire planet Eldora. Lyra looked at Dorian, her expression serious without a trace of hesitation. We can't do this alone. They won't just attack the temple, they'll try to take the whole planet. Without help from our allies, we won't be able to stop them. Dorian nodded, feeling the intensity in the air. He looked at Lyra, her eyes as resolute as a warrior ready to step into battle. I agree, but it's not just the temple we must protect. We have to safeguard everything we've built. And if they discover this energy source, no one in the universe will be safe. Lyra took the communication device and began sending messages to their old friends, the warriors and allies who had fought alongside them in the past. Their group may not be large, but the combination of these warriors and the technology they had uncovered from the ancient civilization could create a force to be reckoned with. Send the message, Lyra said, her eyes fixed on the screen displaying the transmission waves. Everyone needs to be here right away. This is the decisive battle. Dorian walked over to Lyra, his gaze focused on the signals being sent, a feeling of unease rising within him. The Red Council is no easy enemy. They're not only powerful, but they're also ruthless. If they seize this temple, everything will be over. Lyra looked at him deeply without hesitation. That's true, but we've already risen to protect this planet. There is no other choice but to fight. That's why we must stand strong for everything we've built. As they prepared for the battle, the light from the temple continued to shine, almost as if it was waiting for something they couldn't fully understand yet. Dorian and Lyra knew that the energy within the temple could not only save Eldora, but could also give power to the dark forces of the universe. Everything was ready. The Alliance had been summoned. The warriors, the protectors, and those who had stood with them in previous battles were all present. But Dorian and Lyra knew this was no ordinary fight. We're not just protecting the temple, Dorian said, his voice growing somber, his eyes staring into the stillness of Eldora. We're protecting everything this planet represents. If we fail, no one will have the chance to rise again. Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same resilience he saw in himself. We won't fail, Dorian. Eldora won't fall into the hands of those who wish to destroy it. We've done too much to get here, and we will protect it to the end. Now, with their allies gathered, everything was set for the greatest battle they had ever faced. Dorian and Lyra had no choice but to continue this fight, not just for the temple, but for the future of the entire universe. The battle was about to begin, and they could not afford to retreat. As the sun slowly set, the atmosphere on Eldora was far from peaceful. A sense of tension hung heavily over everything, as if the entire planet was waiting for something inevitable. Dorian and Lyra stood before the temple gates, watching the sky darken. Though Eldora was healing, the arrival of the Red Council was a threat that could not be ignored. This was not just a battle to protect the temple, but a fight for the very survival of the planet itself. We can't let them in, Dorian said, his voice deep and full of resolve. He gazed at the sky, feeling the impending storm drawing nearer. They won't just destroy the temple, they'll consume the entire planet if we don't stop them. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes sharp and unwavering. The Red Council never stops. They want control of the temple's power to dominate everything. And if we don't rise up to protect it, Eldora will be nothing more than prey for them. Dorian looked at Lyra, not only seeing her determination, but also the deep empathy she held. They had been through many trials together, but this battle might be the greatest challenge they would ever face. We need to act now, Dorian continued. Let them think we're weak. Let them believe they can take Eldora without any resistance. But when they land, we'll make them pay. Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen displaying images of the Red Council's fleet approaching. Just as Dorian had said, they needed to make the Council believe that everything would be easy, only to create a surprise when the battle began. But this surprise had to be meticulously prepared. Call back all our allies, Lyra said, her voice now steady and resolute. We must prepare for the biggest battle Eldora has ever known. Dorian needed no further prompting. He immediately activated the communication systems and sent out the call to the warriors who had been ready to stand with them. Signals began to arrive from the front lines, from alliances, and from old comrades making their way toward Eldora. The free warriors, the off-planet fighters, and the nearby cosmic forces had heard the call. As Lyra and Dorian prepared for the coming battle, the communication screen flickered again, signaling that the Red Council had entered Eldora's orbit. Lyra wasted no time issuing instructions and defensive strategies. Every decision in these moments could change the course of the battle. Our alliance may not be large, Dorian said, standing before the command group, but we have advantages they can't anticipate. The ancient technologies of the temple, the weapons and defenses left by the civilization that came before us. We're not just fighting them with strength, but with intelligence with the knowledge we've uncovered. Lyra looked at Dorian, her eyes filled with determination. This isn't just a military battle. This is a battle for power for what we protect. We need to show them that even though they have fleets, even though they have armies, we have things they cannot defeat. Dorian nodded, realizing that everything had become more than just about them. This was the fight for Eldora and for the universe itself. The survival of this planet depended on the choices they were about to make. When the warriors and defense forces were finally ready, Dorian and Lyra stood facing each other, feeling more connected than ever before. I can't say we won't face danger, Dorian said, his voice heavy, but I believe we will fight to the end. Lyra responded with a steadfast look. We will not lose. Eldora will never be theirs. And as the final signals from their allies came through, the battle officially began. The Red Council's ships slowly descended to the planet's surface, preparing for an all-out assault. But the warriors of Eldora were ready not only to defend the temple, but to protect the future of this planet. The greatest battle in Eldora's history was about to begin, and one thing was certain: no one could stop it now. The atmosphere in the temple grew tense as the battle raged outside. The first wave of the Red Council's attack had been repelled, but that was just the beginning of a long and grueling confrontation. Dorian and Lyra stood facing each other, the light from the temple reflecting on their faces, creating a sense that the entire planet was breathing in sync with them. The situation worsened when the Red Council began using long-range weapons, destroying their defensive lines from a distance. The energy columns activated to protect the city began to weaken. Lyra stared at the screen while Dorian sighed, his eyes never leaving the fierce battles unfolding. We can't keep going like this. The Red Council has too much power, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with unwavering determination. They may be strong militarily, but we have another kind of power. We have the temple, and we know how to use it. Dorian understood what she meant. The ancient temple was not just a grand structure, but an endless source of energy. However, this power also carried unimaginable risks. They had used this energy to protect the planet, but now to defeat the Red Council, they would have to activate it once again, with an intensity they had never used before. We'll have to take a risk, Dorian said. If we don't stop them now, we'll lose Eldora forever. Lyra nodded, but her eyes searched deep into his, as if contemplating something more. There's another option, Dorian. If we can't win now, we could open a powerful energy gate, destroy everything, but it would destroy the temple permanently. Eldora would never be a place we could live again. Dorian looked at Lyra, sensing the pain in her words. If they did that, they would not only be fighting the Red Council, but facing terrible consequences. The temple, the energy of the entire planet, would be destroyed. They would have nowhere to turn. But if we don't do that, Dorian said, the Red Council won't just seize the temple. They'll destroy Eldora and everything we've built. Lyra took a deep breath. The price will be high, but if that's what needs to be done, I'm ready. Dorian looked at her, and in that moment he knew they couldn't turn back. Everything had come to a point of no return. They had fought not just for the temple, but for a future they believed in. They had allies, warriors who stood with them, and now the decision was in their hands. We'll do it, Dorian said, his voice firm. We will fight until the end. Lyra said nothing more, only looking at Dorian once more, before turning back to the temple. Her hands placed gently on the ancient carvings, feeling the power flowing from them. Dorian stepped up beside her, and together they activated the temple's energy. Light began to flare from the center of the temple, the powerful beams radiating out across the space. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the entire planet, as if Eldora itself was fracturing. The Red Council was caught off guard. Their spacecraft were pushed back, the protective energy columns surged with renewed power, and their warriors were forced back by the overwhelming force emanating from the temple. But as the light from the temple reached its peak, Dorian and Lyra felt an intense pain course through their bodies. The energy had been activated to its maximum potential, but the price was far greater than they had anticipated. They were sacrificing the temple and perhaps themselves to save the planet. Did we do the right thing? Lyra asked, her voice tinged with worry. Dorian took her hand, smiling softly, though the smile held a trace of sorrow. We've done everything we could,